The story begins by showing a woman named Iris, who is mourning the loss of her son, Matteo. The only memento she has left is a small toy boat that once belonged to him. While her husband sleeps, Iris decides to drive in an attempt to calm her troubled mind. Soon after, she abandons her car and continues on foot toward a place filled with memories, a memorial site dedicated to her son, where she notices his initial carefully carved into a tree. The sight of this symbol plunges Iris into deep despair, and as she nears the edge of a cliff, her thoughts turn toward ending her life so that she might be reunited with Matteo. At that critical moment, a man named Richard appears. He gently tries to dissuade her from taking such an irreversible step by sharing his own painful experience. Richard reveals that he once suffered severe trauma following a car accident that claimed the life of his former girlfriend, Chloe, a tragedy that left him hospitalized and unable to move for over 2 months. In response, Iris opens up about the heartbreaking story of her son, who died after being left unattended while playing. Their shared sorrow creates an immediate and profound emotional connection between them, and Richard does his best to convince Iris that even in the midst of overwhelming despair, life still holds the possibility of hope. After their heartfelt conversation, they bid each other farewell, both seemingly having found a small measure of solace. However, as Iris prepares to leave, Richard senses that she may have reconsidered her decision. Together, they walk back toward the car, but just as Iris is about to enter, Richard unexpectedly steps in and blocks the car door. Without warning, he exits and returns carrying an umbrella that he uses in a threatening manner. He forces Iris into his car and binds her securely. When she eventually awakens, she finds herself a captive in Richard's vehicle, her hands tied. As she attempts to use her smartwatch to call for help, Richard assures her that her efforts will be in vain and even returns the toy boat to her. Desperation fuels Iris to take matters into her own hands. She finds a knife and carefully frees herself from her restraints. In her struggle for freedom, she causes the car to swerve off the road and crash into a tree. A fierce scuffle ensues inside the vehicle, and both she and Richard are thrown from the car onto the ground. In that moment of chaos, Richard reveals that Iris has only 20 minutes before an injection he administered takes full effect and renders her body paralyzed. Determined to escape, Iris makes a frantic attempt to flee. However, her actions inadvertently accelerate the onset of the injection's effects. Richard persistently pursues her, and as she flees, Iris realizes that her physical strength is rapidly diminishing. With no other option, she sets a timer for 20 minutes and continues her arduous journey, every step growing heavier and more labored. All the while, Richard casually follows behind her, his gaze fixed and unwavering. When the timer nears its end, Iris finds herself too exhausted to continue walking and seeks refuge in a secluded hiding spot. Although Richard seems to lose her trail for a brief moment, Iris quietly conceals herself beneath some cover. As time ticks on, she feels ants beginning to crawl over her face. Unable to endure the discomfort, she lets out a cry that inadvertently reveals her location. Realizing she has been discovered, Iris retreats into the water despite her inability to swim confidently. She resigns herself to the current, which drags her steadily toward a nearby tree. Clinging desperately to survival, she uses her arms to keep afloat as her legs fail her. All the while, the relentless countdown continues. In her paralyzed state, unable to muster any movement, Iris can only listen and watch her surroundings in a state of helplessness. As she lies there, vulnerable and motionless, the sound of an approaching engine fills the air. Iris closes her eyes in resignation, only to have the noise abruptly cease. At that crucial moment, a man named Bill appears, offering assistance to the unresponsive Iris. Observing that she shows no immediate reaction, Bill gently rotates her body and moves his finger in front of her face to test whether she can still see. Iris manages to signal her response by blinking once for yes and twice for no. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Bill carefully carries Iris home despite the considerable difficulty of doing so. Not long after their arrival, a knock is heard at the door. Iris blinks repeatedly, using her limited ability to send quick signals to Bill. When the door is opened, it is revealed that Richard stands there, claiming he had been involved in a car accident and is searching for his wife. Bill politely asks him to wait outside while he goes inside to fetch a telephone. Seizing the opportunity to further his deceit, Richard pretends to feel unwell and asks to borrow the phone, insisting that he lost his own cell phone. In an attempt to build trust, he inquires whether Bill lives with his wife, subtly seeking any clues that might reveal Iris's whereabouts. Bill responds that his wife passed away from a heart attack and admits that he has not been entirely truthful. As the phone rings, Bill does not answer immediately. Seizing the opportunity, Richard begins to improvise, pretending that he has found Iris and claiming that she might be at a warehouse. When Richard tries to approach the location, Bill shoves him, causing him to fall against a bookshelf. Following this, Bill manages to call for help, sparking a fierce struggle in which he eventually gains control of the situation. While they are on the floor, Richard locates a knife and launches an attack on Bill, stabbing him in the leg and stomach until Bill is rendered helpless. Once he is certain that Bill can no longer move, Richard searches the warehouse but finds no sign of Iris. Determined to eliminate any trace of her presence, he decides to set the entire house on fire. Meanwhile, Iris has taken refuge behind a bed. The only part of her body still capable of movement is her fingers. Richard douses the room with gasoline, and the slight movement of Iris's fingers catches his attention. Noticing a trail of blood beneath the bed, he realizes that Iris is hiding there. Richard then ignites the fire and exits, returning to his car. However, as he starts the engine, a sudden recollection makes him change his mind, and he resolves to retrieve Iris by placing her in the front passenger seat. At that moment, his daughter calls to share the news that she received excellent grades and wishes to celebrate by visiting with her mother. Richard speaks with his wife, who confirms the visit, and though he is somewhat reluctant, Richard agrees. With the fuel running low, he stops at a gas station, dons a pair of dark sunglasses, and leaves Iris alone in the car. Desperate, Iris begins to search for a way to escape. She slowly maneuvers her hand toward the seatbelt in a bid to free herself and tilts her body toward the window, cautiously surveying her surroundings. A young child approaches the car, evoking memories of her own lost son. As the child's mother comes to retrieve the child, Richard promptly returns and admonishes Iris. He tightens the seatbelt around her once more, then conceals his tools behind his shirt and attaches cables to his vehicle in preparation for any unforeseen developments. Outside the car, a police officer approaches and knocks on the window. Though Iris remains unable to speak, Richard hears the knock and steps outside. The officer inquires about the whereabouts of the truck and expresses a desire to speak with Iris. Richard assures the officer that his wife is merely intoxicated, though he soon finds himself in trouble when it becomes apparent that his driver's license has expired. He begins to recount that his wife had once been involved in an accident while intoxicated. When the officer asks about a wound on his head, Richard falls silent for a moment. Amid the conversation, Iris manages to slightly open the window, and the officer hears a sound coming from inside the car. Richard fabricates a story, claiming that they became separated after the loss of their son, Mateo. In a soft, pleading whisper, Iris begs for help, and the officer notices something moving behind Richard's shirt, prompting him to try to intervene. However, Richard swiftly attacks the officer with a cable he had concealed, leaving the officer paralyzed. After subduing the officer, Richard returns to the car, which is already soaked in gasoline. At this juncture, it becomes evident that the injection device is no longer in its original position, having been inadvertently moved closer by Iris during their journey. Regaining his composure, Richard begins to recount how he was once forced to remain confined to his bed for 2 months, an experience that nearly drove him to the brink of insanity. When Iris attempts to appeal to his emotions, cautioning that his actions might ultimately cost him his wife and daughter, Richard abruptly alters his plan. He now intends to drown Iris, asserting that time is nearly up. In a final desperate effort, Iris tries to inject medicine into his leg, but she lacks the strength to do so properly. Seizing the injection, Richard uses it until it is completely empty, causing Iris to scream in pain. Without pause, Richard retrieves a knife and other necessary equipment, carries them to the boat, and prepares Iris for what he ominously refers to as the final destination. Overwhelmed by sorrow, Iris breaks down in tears, which only catches Richard's attention further. She instructs him to retrieve Mateo's toy boat from her pocket. Complying, Richard does as she asks, but in a moment of unintentional defiance, Iris manages to take hold of the knife and stabs him. When Richard attempts to reclaim his weapon, Iris deliberately moves the boat, causing his weapon to fall and sending him tumbling into the water. Without hesitation, Iris grabs his weapon and fires at Richard. Shortly thereafter, the boat begins to sink, and with her body still not fully under her control, Iris is dragged into the water along with the boat. Not long after, the toy boat is seen floating on the surface. Emerging from the water, Iris struggles and swims toward the shore. On the opposite side, she notices that Richard has also managed to swim to the shore. With the last vestiges of her strength, she moves toward Richard and utters her final words, "Thank you." And thus, the story comes to its end.
Thank you.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. Because by subscribing, you have supported me to make better videos. See you in the next video.